Okay, good day, everybody. Wow, my face seems to be right over the top of some sort of hangman's noose. Today we're going to talk about a couple of different things involving early America, a couple of different events, phenomena, whatever you may like to call it. One of which would be, let me get my screen right here, try to anyway. One of which would be the Salem witch trials, and the other would be the Great Awakening. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Salem witch trials, and this has been, kind of mentioned in pop culture and popular history for a long time, but the significance of it is sometimes lost on people. Just like it says here, I'm just going to tell you the general gist of the Salem witch trials. Late 1690s, there was this, or the 1690s, late 17th century. There's this horrible hysteria in Salem, Massachusetts, and of course this is Puritan society. These women were seemingly, or people started to fall ill of this horrible sort of ailment, which they started to sort of lose their minds and go insane. And there were certain other women who were accused of this, accused of causing this ailment. And those individuals who were accused of this were labeled as witches. And the society eventually convicted them of being witches, and they were executed. But in a sense, this was not an example of an actual, okay, there's a witch causing this horrible ailment or putting a spell on other people. This actually wasn't happening. In a sense, this was a movement against people who weren't originally of the society. This was a movement against outsiders. The outsiders were the ones who were being blamed for this ailment. The outsiders were the ones who were being labeled as the witches. The outsiders were the ones who were convicted of being the witches. And this obviously is sort of a theme in American history, still a theme today. It's the outsiders who are bad. It's the people who are different. Honestly, this is human nature, I think, a good example of human nature. And that's what I think the significance of the Salem witch trials is. So these young women were coming down with this mysterious ailment. They were having fits. And the actual story is, okay, maybe they were faking this. Maybe they were blaming other people for this. Maybe they wanted to get back at certain people in their lives. Or maybe they're hallucinating. There was this theory that stated that there was this hallucinatory fungi, sort of like this mushroom that got into the food, this root that got into the food and caused hallucinations and caused these fits. But nonetheless, the society, the town of Salem, was just baffled about who could be causing these girls to have these fits. And essentially, the girls said, the girls blamed their ailments on certain people. Especially, well, an example of this would be this Indian slave, Tituba, who was thought to be a witch, and who the girls pointed the finger at Tituba. And unfortunately, more and more women kind of pointed the finger, or more and more of these women were labeled. Especially, and if you look at Tituba, she's an Indian, she's a slave. And of course, that would mean that she's an outsider, she's a person of color. This turned into more and more accusations by the young girls, and these trials went on. And they were kind of these bogus trials, like with witnesses saying, well, something bad happened to me when Tituba was around, or something bad happened to me when this woman was around, therefore she must be a witch. So this testimony sort of, labeled these women as witches, caused the society to convict them of being witches, and they were put to death as a result. 6 men, and the other myth about the Salem witch trials is that all the witches were women, or all the women, or all the people that were put to death were women. 6 men, 14 women were convicted and executed. They were hanged. This was bad. One man who refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, he refused to plead either way, he was crushed to death with heavy stones. Now that would be rough. And his death went on for 2 days. So lying underneath the huge amount of heavy stones and slowly suffering before you slowly pass away, that would be a tough way to go. So these Puritans, they weren't messing around, that's for sure. So how were they found guilty? Like I said, eyewitness testimony was sort of the litmus test here. If somebody showed up in a dream or hallucination, or somebody said, well, I saw this person in my dream and he was doing bad things to me, that was evidence that that person was a witch. If a person's answers on the stand when they were confronted, if they didn't appear to be confident, they might be convicted. Their body language would indicate guilt. Now, if I knew somebody was being crushed by stones, heavy stones, and suffering for 2 days, and I was next in line being accused of being a witch, I might act pretty nervous too. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, correlation. I started getting sick when, Tituba started coming around, or I started getting sick when Mary started coming around. Then correlation was evidence that you were a witch and you needed to be put to death. But what's interesting is people who were accused, like I said, were outsiders, or people who were thought to be expendable. The elderly, people of color, people from other communities. And again, this was a time where Puritan society was changing by leaps and bounds. More and more people were coming over from England, trying to migrate to the Americas, trying to be accepted into Puritan society. And so the Salem witch trials can be seen as a reaction against change, which is fascinating. And oftentimes, you look at... I think of just in recent months, Donald Trump talking about how this Russia investigation is, quote-unquote, a witch hunt. People saying, well, this person is this and this person is that, labeling other people. A similar thing happened in the 1950s where certain people were labeled as being communists. This person was seen in this place, therefore he is a communist. This person said this, therefore he is a communist. This whole kind of rampant idea that something malicious is in society, we need somebody to blame for these horrible things going on, is often referred to as a witch hunt, and that, of course, comes from the Salem witch trials. So the whole witch test thing and the burning of the stake and drowning and all that other stuff that you might see in cartoons or parodies. There's something that I think the Simpsons did a few years back on the Salem witch trials. Monty Python, all that stuff happened in Europe, but the witches that were convicted, not the witches, but the women and the men that were convicted in Salem, they were hanged. That is the significance of the Salem witch trials. I want to talk a little bit about the Great Awakening, a completely different topic, although this is, again, a topic rooted in religion. I would say that the Salem witch trials would be something that divided America. The Great Awakening, or discouraged people from coming into unified communities. The Great Awakening was something that united all of the colonies. The Great Awakening occurred in the 1730s and the 1740s, and it was a reaction against this idea that churches were becoming soft, that people were showing up and didn't really care. I mean, people were going to church but didn't care about what the preacher was saying. And churches were too easy on them. Like, oh, you could get forgiveness, no big deal. All you gotta do is pray about it and come to church, and then you're good. And this turned into church becoming really, really boring, and people didn't want to come to church because of that. And it turned, like I said, people like Jonathan Edwards, who was the founder of this movement, saw this as people just going through the motions. And according to Jonathan Edwards, religion is far more, it's about far more than going through the motions. So Jonathan Edwards and people of his ilk started to change things. The Great Awakening, it was a religious revival spreading all throughout the colonies. It was a return to churches becoming harsh. threatening people, the congregation, with hell. If you did not convert to Christianity, if you did not accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, then you were going straight to hell. And God had the power to send you to hell or damn you to hell anytime He wanted to. In fact, the metaphor that Jonathan Edwards, you can find this in his famous sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. He talks about God having His hand and you dangling from His hand on a spider web. And you are just a little tiny slivering spider, and all God has to do is twitch His finger and down you would go into the fiery pits of hell. You know, that kind of thing. That really got people going. And it was exciting for people, I think. It showed that there were real consequences in Christianity if you weren't a good Christian. People loved it. People ate it up. More people started to convert to Christianity as a result of this. So this was the first mass movement of the American people, and therefore, like I said, united many people across all of the 13 colonies. So it was, a huge religious movement. That's all I got today for the Great Awakening and the Salem Witch Trials. I will see you all later.